Thank you all so much for coming tonight to hear us share some of our stories with you. It's truly an honor. I want to tell you about the night that I died in Vegas. How many of y'all have been to Vegas before? Yeah. I was sitting in a strip club called Seamless. It was around 3:30 a.m. in the morning. I still remember it like it was yesterday. I remember the smells of cigar smoke, cigarette smoke, Red Bulls, mixed with vodka before Moscow mules were even a thing. I even remember the sound that was playing in the background. Gnarls Barkley, Crazy. Y'all remember that jam? I also remember the way I was feeling in my body. My feet were hurting. I was tired. I'd been wearing 6-inch heels for 10 hours that night for going on 10 years. And as I sat across the way from a colleague of mine named Silk, I knew that she had noticed the bruises all over my body, the strangulation marks around my neck. And I glanced down into my Louis Vuitton clutch. I saw $300 wadded up and tucked inside of there. I knew I needed $3,000 before I could go home with enough money to face my pimp without suffering another beating like the one I was currently recovering from. And Silk asked me a question that night. Really 6 words that changed the course of my life forever. In fact, it's why I'm here with you tonight. She asked me, "Don't you want to be happy?" It seems like a simple enough question, right? But for someone like me who'd suffered a lifetime of physical and sexual trauma from infancy, happiness was something I only ever dreamt of. So that night, we devised a plan to fake my own death so that I could escape my traffickers for good. I'll share more on that with you shortly. But now, I want to flash forward to a time in my life, a time of life after my death, a time of starting over when not even death could stand in the way of my freedom. I'm thinking of a specific time when my son was just a newborn. We were living in a garage in Newport Beach, California. It was cold that night, and I remember looking into my son's eyes, as most parents do their newborns, and thinking, this can't be the life that I give my son. For I was determined to give him a life free of poverty, of abuse, of being a product of the foster system, of being a warden of the state until I was 24 years old. This hellish life I was not going to give him. So I found an angel investor to give me enough money just to get me on my feet. I remember driving to that apartment complex in Irvine, California. It was literally the first one that I saw. I stopped in there and they told me, "We have a move-in special for 3 months free rent." And so that day, when my son was 3 months old, we were able to move in with not a penny more. We had the clothes on our back and a stroller. We didn't even have a bed to sleep in, a blanket to keep us warm, a towel to dry our body, or even a cup of water to drink from. So I made a decision in that moment to go online to a mutually beneficial relationship site. And I'll share more of those details with you in a moment. But first, I want to walk you through a process. How many of you have ever felt stuck, right? Stuck in a job, in a cycle, in a pattern, in a relationship, in a habit that you just can't escape from, no matter how hard you try? So we've all been there. So I'm going to guide you through this process really quickly. So I want you to close your eyes. I want you to imagine that you were a young child, around 5 or 6 years old, just happy and free. Maybe think back to one of your favorite toys or your games that you used to play. And it felt so good to be in your body. You would run around, nothing mattered. You were just happy. And then imagine experiencing the most violating abuse and trauma that your mind can fathom. And you can't escape from it. And the abuse and the trauma and the pain keeps coming. And it gets more immense. And you don't know what to do because you want out of the pain. You want the pain and the trauma to stop. But the more you try to stop it, the more you realize you are it. That it's in your body. And that the pain and the trauma you're experiencing is within you. And there's no way out. You can't escape. And the more you try to escape, the more you're reminded of how painful it is. Now I want you to open your eyes. This experience is what victims of human trafficking go through every day. The pain and the trauma is in their body and they can't leave. So we've all seen the headlines, right? Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, making human trafficking a trend. Maybe some of us have heard of organizations like Operation Underground, who rescue child victims from sexual slavery. But nobody talks about what happens after human trafficking. What is life really like? What's the ugly truth of out really like? What is life like beyond freedom? Today, I want to share with you some of my personal experiences. The ugly truth of out looks like developing learning disabilities. After 10 years of being trafficked and suffering multiple concussions and head trauma that led to mild traumatic brain injury manifesting in the form of dyslexia, of not just my numbers, but also my letters. Imagine having to apply to college with a 7th grade equivalent education. Or even more challenging, having to take 5 remedial math courses without even being able to get a college credit. That is the ugly truth of out. The ugly truth of out looks like me trusting strangers to care for my newborn, while I went off and taught yoga at an exclusive 5-star resort, and not even that was enough to pay the rent. Picture this. I walk into a Starbucks. I see a woman, she's enamored with my son. She asks, "Can I pick him up?" I say, "Yes." 2 days later, I'm texting her to see if she'll watch my son while I go off and teach yoga. That is the ugly truth of out. The ugly truth of out is me selling videos of pumping breast milk and knowing that most of the men that are buying this content simply are buying it to appease some kind of fetish. There's always a silver lining in every ugly truth, and that is the bodybuilders. The bodybuilders bought my content in hopes that I would sell them the actual breast milk so they could get a leg up in their fitness competitions. And being the holistic nutritionist that I am, I felt great about that. That's the ugly truth of out. The ugly truth of out is me being a housekeeper while pregnant for a woman I knew in the life that was a big porn star. She had asked me to come out and teach yoga at her yoga studios. But when I got to her home, things were very different than she explained. And when money got tight, she left me high and dry, which meant she wasn't paying me for the yoga classes I taught, despite the fact that I had a master's degree equivalent in teaching yoga. And even though I know she did the best she could, this happens all the time to victims and survivors of human trafficking. They're not paid their worth. And when all that fails, you go back to what you know. That is the ugly truth of out. The ugly truth of out is Me applying for WIC when I'm vegan and knowing that I won't be consuming the milk, cheese, or eggs, but the peanut butter. The peanut butter alone would provide enough sustenance so I could create milk to feed my son. That is the ugly truth about. And all of this to be the student that I am today. I didn't mention I graduated from Orange Coast College with what some might say more honors and scholarships than anyone had seen in years. And I got accepted into Cal State University Fullerton, where I'm currently pursuing my bachelor's degree in communications with an emphasis in both advertising and marketing, which basically makes me a double major. So, I have a concept for you. What if your courage was someone else's solution, and that in order to break a cycle or a pattern, someone else had to intervene? That day that we moved into my apartment in Irvine, I went online to a site called Seeking Arrangement, where I met a man by the name of Papa B. He invited me to California Pizza Kitchen, which at the time I thought was kind of strange because Seeking Arrangement is known for older, affluent men taking care of younger women, and CPK is just kind of regular. Imagine his surprise when I pull up with my 3-month-old in a stroller. His look of desire shifted to compassion and concern. As I sat down, he explained, "I thought your son was 5, that's why I suggested CPK in the first place." As I told him my life circumstances, he opened up and shared with me he'd been a single father to 5 Italian boys. He said he knew firsthand how challenging it was to raise children alone in one of the most affluent places on the planet. After we finished our pizza, he took us to Target, where he bought us a bed to sleep on, a blanket to keep us warm, a towel to dry our body, and even a cup of water to drink from. And that night, his courage became my solution, and my courage is his solution. There were other strangers that cared too. The first week we moved into our building, we went downstairs to a mixer in the clubhouse where we met a woman by the name of Sharon. She saw my son and instantly connected with him. She called him her little Buddha baby. She shared with us she'd been a single mom to 2 grown boys and how that had greatly impacted her life. I told her my circumstances, and she suggested I go apply to teach yoga at the Pelican Hill Resort. I went the next day and was instantly hired. She encouraged me to focus on creating a beautiful life for my son and let that be my guiding light. And that's exactly what I've done. I'm curious, where is your community? My community used to be the strip clubs. In fact, you'd be shocked at some of the strip clubs I was trafficked in right here in Phoenix. I was so desperate to create family and community. I created it with the strangers I met along the way. But not just in my personal life, on my college campus as well, where I formed the first ever human trafficking awareness club called Beyond Freedom. Things were going really well for me, but soon the pressures of being a full-time student with a learning challenge, working while not making the rent, suffering from extreme PTSD in the form of panic and anxiety attacks from 10 years of being trafficked, as well as enduring severe postpartum depression, baby blues from the stresses of raising a son alone proved to be too much for me to bear. One night, I decided I didn't want to go on living anymore. And I reached out for help to a stranger by the name of Tony Robbin through a social media post. The next morning, to my surprise, he responded. He said, "I want to help you help more women, but first, I want to help you." Right away, he sent me to his event in Palm Beach, Florida, where I got to meet him seconds before I walked on fire. And after that event, I realized that all the power was already within me that I needed to succeed in this life. Over the next 2 years, he sent me to every event he had. And people often ask me, what separates you from some of the others that get extraordinary results after attending his events? And I always say, the answer's simple. I actually did the work. In fact, last year, we launched Beyond Freedom Not-for-Profit at his Business Mastery event in Las Vegas, Nevada. We were able to raise $50,000 in just 3 short days with the strategic help of his platinum partners, who were influential in helping us create the business infrastructure that is the organization today. But this is a very real problem. I still experience PTSD in the form of panic attacks almost daily. It could be simple things like going to Costco and having an anxiety attack in the middle of the produce aisle because I'm flashed back to the times in my life where I've had loaded guns held to my head at the very same parking lot. Simple things like going to the dentist for a routine cleaning, and I'm flashed back to the time at the dentist office in Vegas where my pimp beat up the office management staff for trying to give me the treatment I so desperately needed. Other scarier times like driving on the 405 with my baby and having a debilitating panic attack where I'm unable to move. I'm flashed back to the times I was trafficked on that very freeway. But this is not about me. These experiences and more, survivors of human trafficking have to endure every single day. Silk convinced me to do something I'd never done before. She convinced me to leave the club without texting or calling my pimp where I was going. When we got to her house, we staged my overdose and sent the evidence to him via text, waiting for his reply. We heard nothing. The next morning, we woke up, crickets. And it was in that moment I realized I was disposable. And the man that I loved and the man I thought loved me was simply exploiting me in a $150 billion global industry that is human trafficking. Now, my story takes a turn for the better here. Through a series of miraculous events orchestrated by the universe and by a man sitting here in the audience today, I was able to escape and flee to an island in Thailand where I studied the ancient practice of Tantra for a year. It was during this time I was able to heal and reintegrate back into my body. As we learned from the exercise, most survivors of physical and sexual trauma experience what we call disassociation as the body's mechanism to protect itself. But most times, they never return. It was during my teaching here that I learned I'd been sexually repressed and sexually exploited my entire life. More importantly still, I learned there was a direct connection of my sexuality to my spirituality. And it was through this concept that I was able to create Dancehall, a healing modality that encourages women to shake the shame attached to their sexuality and to create a new empowering belief therein. Tonight, I would like to encourage you to join the movement in being the solution to ending this $150 billion global industry that is human trafficking by supporting organizations like Operation Underground, who have perfected the art of rescuing victims from sexual slavery. Organizations like Tony Robbin, who perfected the art of allowing women to take back their power so they can go on and live successful lives. Operations like Beyond Freedom, who have equipped women with the tools of making the process of going from product to person more manageable. And last but certainly not least, organizations like strike out slavery, who perfected the art of using their celebrity platform to reach the masses and educating them around human trafficking issues. Won't you join me in bringing these survivors back into the community so that they can truly go on to experience a life of just surviving to thriving? My name is Jennelle Gordon. Thank you very much.